the second topic, so using Twitter as a research tool. So there are features within Twitter that I think are useful for saving different resources and that you can use to build what I kind of like to call an academic database or academic resource database, and also engage in research. So I wanted to go over these features in Twitter in a little bit more detail. So they are bookmarks, lists, and of course, tweeting, tagging, messaging, and other useful features. So let's start with bookmarks. So I started using bookmarks recently, and I find it extremely helpful. I wrote a blog post on this, maybe I can share, but you can use bookmarks to build what I've kind of called a personal resource or research database. Really what it is bookmarks. We used to, back in the day, from what I've heard from other Twitter users, they would have to sort of use a hashtag like save for later to remind them that they could go back and in those hashtags and actually review articles they meant to come back to and read, but didn't have time at the time that they saved it to actually read that article. So the bookmarks is a great feature added by Twitter. And so as you're scrolling through your Twitter feed and you come across an article or maybe a call for journal articles or for a conference paper, and you say, I really want to participate in that, or I really want to look into that a little bit more. I just do not have time right now to look at this. Instead of creating like another tab in your computer, just save it as a bookmark. And that's pretty easy to do. Maybe we can demonstrate how to do that later. But there's just a quick little button you press on the post and you can click save bookmark. And at that point, you start to accumulate these articles. And so I always recommend that you actually schedule time to just go through and review your bookmarks. And if there's webinars coming up, register for those webinars. And again, put that information in your calendar. And then you can remove the bookmark. So you can over time sort of curate this personal database resources that you can come back to. Sometimes there's great evergreen content on Twitter, articles like, 10 great tips for qualitative research or quantitative research, and you're like, that will always be helpful for me, and I want to make sure I read that article. So these are the kinds of articles you may wish to save in your bookmarks and even keep in there over time if you found that particular article very helpful. So I've used this example. So this is my bookmarks, and this was an example of something I saved. I actually saved, you may be familiar with Mendeley. It's a research database. I saved this post actually to remind me that Mendeley has a new reference manager tool, and I meant to update my tutorial on my blog about using Mendeley. So that's why I saved this bookmark, but I wanted to make sure I watched their tutorial so that I was able to teach other people in my network. But you can save all kinds of articles. This is one example. Okay, and the next feature I wanted to mention is lists. I'm new to lists, but I'm in love with them. They are great. So when you can create a list or you can follow existing lists. So in terms of creating a list, you can create a public or a private list. A public list just means that whoever you add to it, think of it as sort of a curated collection of individuals that you want to follow, maybe tied together through a common topic or theme, or maybe they're people within your specific field of research. That is a very helpful list for you to be able to go back to. And those people would then know that you added them to the list if it's public. If it's private, they won't know. So I would find that helpful, for example, in a specific project. So if you're working on a research project about social media, or that in some way involves Twitter or social media, it would be useful, I would think, to create a private list. And then other people they can't see that they're on it. But that would be one use. And again, yeah, so you can follow or curate specific lists based on your academic interests. So if you go to lists in Twitter, you can search academia or your particular field. There may already be a list. If the list is public, other people can follow it. So that's kind of a benefit of starting a public list. And you may even be on a list. I was surprised to see I was on a list, academic I guess, a list of academic Twitter accounts. So that was kind of cool. There's a way to see that. I'll just show you here. So here is the list that I'm currently following. So I'm following grad student resources and higher ed media. And then I clicked this button that is hidden from this pop-up, but it says lists you're on, and then that's where you can actually see which lists you're part of. So lists are really interesting because you have your Twitter feed, that's everyone you follow. But if you wanted to look at a sort of curated list of only people, say, within your specific field, that would be a great way to do it. Or if you're looking for a new job, you could look at just the company's hiring or university's hiring. So that's another good use for lists.
This is really, that was really nice to see, because, people usually follow hashtags, but to know that there's also lists you can follow, it's really interesting.
It's really interesting, and it's just it allows you to sort of create different streams or different feeds that you can sort of tune into depending on what your needs are. Tweeting, tagging, and messaging. So of course you can always tweet questions. I found Twitter very helpful, whereas before I would go to Google and say, how do I do this? Or what are some great resources for doing qualitative what are some great qualitative methods, or what are some great books on this topic? Now I just go to Twitter and I ask Twitter, a Twitter community, like, what would you recommend for doing online ethnography? And there's some really great tweets about that. And although it's important to remember to use the topic specific hashtags, of course. And before, when we talked about the accounts that help amplify academic voices, I've noted a couple here. So Open Academics and Academic Chatter, which Adisha mentioned earlier. By tagging these accounts, they actually sometimes will retweet your content. So if I ask a question to my followers, that will only go out to so many people, but if it's retweeted by Open Academics, it goes out to thousands of people. So you can really get some great engagement that way.
Yeah, and I'd like to add on to that. So for me, when I have a question, let's say, okay, I'm applying to these grad schools, do you guys know any fully funded programs? I did that. So I tagged Academic Chatter and Open Academics, and then I got so many responses about these great programs that I did not know of, and I didn't follow anybody who knew that. But having a tweet that reaches such a large audience will definitely help, especially if you're wanting to ask a specific question. Like, let's say you want to submit an article, but you're not sure. Okay, can I add this there? Do you think it will support? Or what should I do about these reviewer comments that I'm getting? Or just talk with other people who are, going through the same things you are. It really helps, have that community, engagement. The other thing I would say is that there are other accounts too. So there's accounts that for if you're an undergrad and you want to look at labs or, something like that, there's a lot of specific accounts. I know we're not putting those up here because I know these ones are public and I can mention them in a webinar. So, there's definitely a lot of accounts that, you can definitely go and check. And also if you, you can look through our Twitter account. So ESA student section, I always retweet any resource that comes from major, platforms like these and specific to, research scientists. I will definitely retweet those. And, you can also, text me or email me to ask me, okay, can you just tell me what specific accounts you were talking about? And I'll definitely be happy to share. Well,
that's great, Adisha. Thank you. Yes, that's very helpful. And I can't tell you how many books I've got from the library on recommendation from these different Twitter users, and all kinds of things I've checked out just that I didn't know existed, or resources I didn't know were out there. So it can be really, really helpful. I think sometimes we do research in isolation, and I think this is a way that, again, going back to the idea of using Twitter as a social platform, it's not only fun, but it can actually be extremely helpful for research. And another use of Twitter, and one of Twitter's features is, of course, direct messaging. Sometimes you can't direct message people that don't follow you, but in some cases, you may wish to actually create a study about, say, Twitter use in your field. There's a number of research articles I've read in my field regarding the use of Twitter for professional and academic learning. And I imagine that those academics had to actually reach out to seek permission from, or to, get participants. So whether it's an open call for participants or they're actually messaging to ask permission to use some of their content in their study, that could be another way that you can actually use Twitter for your own research.
Yeah, and I definitely like to jump in on that a little bit more, especially if you're trying to write a paper or you're trying to come up with a project where you want to recruit, participants virtually. I did that for my own study. I put out an open call for, people who are in my field who are motivated, and if you're recruiting, just to collaborate with you on a research project, Twitter is a great place. You can either put it out as a tweet and then ask people to DM you in that tweet, so that you don't, if they don't want to talk to you via a public tweet, then they can DM you for information. And I always find that useful to add, DM me for more details, because sometimes you don't want to share too much details on a public platform because it is your project and you might not want to share. So definitely build that up. And then I think we're going to talk about that in the next part is, how to share your research. So I think I will jump in on that as well and tell you how you can use that as well to recruit people.
Yeah, thank you, Ajisha. It's good to know that it was hopefully successful for you for recruiting participants. And what a great way to reach further than your immediate university or your immediate sort of network, right? I mean, there's people you talk to on Twitter that you never would meet in real life. I would never have met Ajisha otherwise, right? I'm in Canada, so the chances of us running into each other are slim, but the fact that we were on Twitter at the same time was great, because then we get to collaborate and have these kinds of opportunities. All right, another use of Twitter is for a conference back channel. So this is the idea that while conferences are happening, there's this back channel happening on Twitter. It's usually Twitter. Some conferences will actually actively promote a Twitter back channel. They'll use a specific conference hashtag. And they're very helpful for, I would say, extending knowledge and expanding information shared at a conference. It's a great way to chat about some of the topics.
Yeah, and yeah, like I mentioned before, the ESA 2020 annual meeting had its own
Great
hashtag that we all encouraged everybody who was sharing about their research, sharing talks, to use that hashtag. We used hashtag ESA 2020. There was also other hashtags that we were I was particularly following, hashtag ESA Watch Party 2020, where they would post, specific sessions like plenary sessions or some things that you needed to be on time for. So, so those really helped, people who, were like trying to navigate a conference that has thousands of people and thousands of sessions. You really, want to look for these hashtags, and they always come along with, what specific topic they're on. So that way you can narrow down your search when you're doing that. And I think it's a really great way. And we also, I think we're going to talk about, doing research, presenting your research via Twitter in a later time. But, all of that is, Twitter is really a great platform for a scientist to use. So, yeah.
I agree. I think Twitter, for academics, it just seems to be one of the best platforms there are. And I know there's other really popular platforms like Instagram and Facebook, but for some reason, Twitter is just kind of special. And it's in the fact that, academics are quite active on Twitter. So it's a great network for us. And of course, that's my last point here, is that back channels will create these opportunities for reflection, hopefully for further learning. And they're just a great way to build your network, because of course you can start to follow other people that attend the same conference.